Michael Jackson spent $35 million building an amusement park on his private ranch. Full roller coasters, a Ferris wheel, a zoo, a movie theater, a train that ran through the property. The world laughed, called him eccentric, bizarre, broken. But here's what psychology actually says. He wasn't broken. He was trying to repair something. Something that was taken from him so early and so completely that he spent the rest of his life building a monument to it. He called it Neverland, after the place where boys never grow up. And he wasn't being poetic. He was being precise. Today, we're going to go inside the psychology of a wounded inner child, using Michael Jackson not as a punchline, not as a tabloid story, but as the most visible, documented case study of what happens when childhood trauma doesn't just scar someone, it freezes them, stops their emotional clock, and forces everything that follows to orbit around the wound. And before this video ends, I'm going to show you the version of this that might already be living inside you.
But to understand Michael, we need to understand the psychology first. Because the inner child is not some soft self-help concept. The science behind it is real, and it's dark. Every child moves through developmental stages. Psychologist Erik Erikson mapped them, each one building the foundation for the next. Play, trust, autonomy, identity. And each stage has a window, a period where the brain is literally wired to absorb certain experiences, form certain capacities, develop certain emotional tools. Miss the window, and the brain doesn't just move on, it gets stuck. Psychologists call it arrested development. Part of the psyche freezes at the age where the damage occurred. And here's the terrifying part. The body keeps growing. The career keeps advancing. The public persona keeps evolving. But inside, there's still a child sitting in that moment of pain, waiting for something that never came. Carl Jung called this the wounded inner child, the part of the self that carries unprocessed childhood experiences into adulthood. And what makes it so insidious is that most people don't know it's running them. They think their choices belong to their adult self, their ambitions, their relationships, their need for control, for approval, for escape. Childhood trauma research consistently shows that unprocessed early wounds don't disappear. They shape adult behavior through unconscious patterns, compulsive achievement seeking, emotional avoidance, pathological need for love, or building environments that recreate what was lost. Michael Jackson is not the exception to this. He is the most documented example of it in modern history, and the evidence is hiding in plain sight, in everything he built, everything he said, and everything the world misread as madness. Let's go back to the beginning, because the wound has a specific origin, and it started before Michael was old enough to understand what was being taken. Michael Jackson started performing at 5 years old. By 8, he was recording professionally. By 10, he was famous. By his early teens, he was one of the most recognized faces on the planet. The world saw a prodigy. What almost nobody saw was what that cost. His father, Joe Jackson, ran rehearsals with a belt in his hand. Mistakes were not discussed, they were punished. Immediately, physically. Michael told Oprah Winfrey in 1993, in the most watched television interview in history, that just seeing his father walk into a room would make him physically sick. Not anxious, not nervous, nauseous. He would start to vomit. He was very strict, very hard. Just a look would scare you. There have been times when he'd come to see me and I would get sick. I'd start to regurgitate. Joe also called him ugly, told him his nose was too wide.
This is the man who controlled every hour of his son's existence from the time he was old enough to hold a microphone. And here's what that does psychologically. When a child's primary source of love is also their primary source of fear, when the person who is supposed to be safe is the person who hurts you, the nervous system never learns what safety actually feels like. The brain builds its entire model of love around performance, around earning, around never being enough. Michael said, "I remember going to the recording studio and there was a park across the street. I'd see all the children playing and I would cry. It would make me sad that I would have to go to work instead."
A child watching other children play through a window while he worked. Let that sit. So what does a person do with a childhood that was stolen? If they have the resources, if they have the money and the will, they try to build it back from scratch, brick by brick, roller coaster by roller coaster. That's what Neverland was. Not a fantasy, not eccentricity. It was a psychological reconstruction project. An attempt, unconscious or not, to recreate the exact environment his childhood never allowed and inhabit it as an adult because part of him never left the age when it was taken. He said it directly when asked why he surrounded himself with children.
People wonder why I always have children around. It's because I find the thing that I never had through them. Disneyland, amusement parks, arcade games. I adore all that stuff because when I was little, it was always work, work, work. Psychologist Dr. Dan Kiley defined Peter Pan syndrome in 1983 as the condition of an adult whose emotional development is arrested, who cannot fully inhabit adult life because part of them is still anchored to a childhood they haven't finished processing. Michael didn't just identify with Peter Pan. He named his home after the place where Peter lived. He kept fairy tales on a tape recorder next to his bed and listened to them every night before sleep. As an adult, as the most famous entertainer on Earth. Inside, he was still 12 years old, still watching children play through a studio window, still waiting for a childhood that was never going to come back. And then there's the perfectionism, the surgeries, the isolation. All of it connects to the same wound. When a child learns that love is conditional on performance, on being good enough, talented enough, obedient enough, the adult they become can never stop proving it. Every record had to break the last one. Every performance had to be flawless. He wept after his iconic moonwalk at the Motown 25 anniversary, not from joy, but because he felt he hadn't held his toes up long enough. The surgeries? Psychologists point to two sources: the ugly his father named, and the face that was no longer just a face. It was a public object, scrutinized by millions, never private, never just his. He began reshaping the only thing that had always belonged to the performance. He was trying to become someone the little boy in Gary, Indiana, couldn't have imagined being criticized. The isolation, the gates of Neverland, the masks in public, the aliases. This is what happens when a person never experiences safe, unconditional love early enough. You stop trusting that the world outside your walls can hold you. You build a wall, you make it beautiful, and you call it home. Now here's where this stops being about Michael Jackson, because what I just described is not unique to him. It's just that most people's version of it doesn't come with a $35 million price tag. It comes quietly, and you might be living inside it right now without knowing its name. The wounded inner child doesn't always build a theme park. Most of the time, the Neverland is invisible, but it's there. It's the adult who works 80 hours a week and can't explain why they never feel like enough, no matter what they achieve. Because the work isn't about success, it's about earning love they never felt was unconditional.
It's the person who cannot tolerate being alone for even one evening, who fills every moment with noise, with people, with distraction, because silence is where the child's voice gets loudest. It's the one who says yes to everyone, who makes themselves endlessly available, endlessly useful, endlessly needed, because the child learned that love had to be earned through service and could be taken away at any moment. It's the person who cannot maintain intimacy, who gets close then creates distance, who sabotages relationships at the exact moment they become real, because real connection was also where real pain lived, and the nervous system can't tell the difference between then and now. It's the one who collects achievements, external markers, status symbols, building, because inside, there's a child who was told in some form, direct or indirect, that who you are is not enough, that what you do is all you have. Psychologist Erik Erikson called this psychosocial stagnation, being frozen in a developmental stage without the tools to move through it. And research is consistent. You don't outgrow an unprocessed wound. You carry it. It travels with you into every relationship, every job, every version of yourself you try to build on top of it.
Michael Jackson is the extreme end of the spectrum, but the spectrum includes almost every adult who grew up without consistent safety, consistent warmth, consistent proof that they were loved for who they were, not what they could perform. Which is most of us, in some form, to some degree. So what do you actually do with that? Here's what psychology says works.
Principle 1. Name the wound. Don't manage the symptom. The first step isn't fixing the behavior, it's identifying what's driving it. Because when you're overworking or people-pleasing or avoiding intimacy, you're not dealing with a bad habit. You're dealing with a child's survival strategy that stopped being useful 20 years ago, but never got the memo. Ask the real question. Not, why can't I stop working so much? But what am I afraid happens if I stop? Who do I become if the achievement goes away? What am I trying to prove, and to whom? The answer to those questions is almost always a specific person, a specific moment, a specific message received in childhood that you're still responding to. Michael never asked those questions clearly enough. Or if he did, he didn't have access to the answers at a time when something could still be changed. The wound stayed open. And everything else, the ranch, the surgeries, the isolation, was scar tissue growing over something that was never properly treated. Principle 2. Separate the child's reality from the adult's truth. The wounded inner child operates on old data. It learned its rules in a context that no longer exists. The child who learned that love was conditional learned that in a specific house, with a specific parent, under specific circumstances. But it wrote that lesson as a universal truth and applied it to every relationship, every room, every person ever since. The work is learning to recognize when you are reacting as an adult and when you are reacting as that child. When the response feels bigger than the situation, when the fear, the need for approval, the defensiveness, the shutdown feels disproportionate, that's almost always the child, not the adult. And the adult has choices the child never did. Principle 3. Give the child what it needed. Stop waiting for someone else to do it. This is the hardest one, because the child is still waiting for the parent to come back and do it differently, waiting for someone to finally see them, finally choose them unconditionally, finally make the original wound make sense. That person is not coming. They couldn't then. They can't now. What psychology calls reparenting is the process of becoming deliberately, consciously, the adult that child needed. Setting limits with people who drain you the way a good parent protects a child. Choosing rest without guilt the way a good parent tells a child it's okay to stop. Speaking to yourself with consistency and warmth, not the conditional cruelty of whatever voice installed the wound. Michael Jackson needed someone to tell him he was enough, without the moonwalk, without the record sales, without the performance. Nobody did, and he didn't know how to tell himself. That's what the work is. And unlike Neverland, it doesn't cost $35 million. But it does cost something. It costs you the comfort of pretending the child isn't there. Michael Jackson died at 50 years old, still trying, still performing, still in some sense waiting for a childhood that had been gone for 4 decades. The world spent 30 years calling him strange, weird, other, and almost nobody asked the question that would have explained everything. What happened to this child? What was taken? And what did he spend the rest of his life trying to recover? He was not crazy. He was not broken beyond repair. He was a child in enormous pain who became the most famous person alive and never had a single private moment to figure out how to grieve what he lost before he was old enough to name it. He built Neverland because no one ever gave him what Neverland represented. Not because he was eccentric, because he was human. Deeply, achingly, irreversibly human. And the part of that story that belongs to you, the version of Neverland you've been building quietly in your own way, that's worth looking at. Not with shame, with the same compassion you might have offered that little boy watching other children play through a recording studio window. If this video showed you something today, if you recognized yourself somewhere in it, tell me in the comments which part hit hardest. I read them all. If this gave you something real, share it with someone who might need it. And subscribe, because this is the kind of conversation I want to keep having. I'll see you in the next one.